Hello and welcome to the Trust Factor Podcast, the only podcast that guarantees your success when you implement its divine age-old teachings. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Trust Factor Podcast, and thank you for joining us today. I hope you had a great weekend. A new winner was notified yesterday with regards to the book Emuna by Rav David Saberman. We've given away another copy. We're only down to 2. After that, my friends, we start to give away the Garden of Emuna. I picked up 10 copies, 5 of the Universal and 5 of the OG. I've got them ready to give away, and that'll start in a couple of weeks, in a few weeks, once we're done giving away the book Emuna. So the Garden of Emuna is the book that we're reading through now in Season 2. We find ourselves still on the same paragraph, and there's really no reason to move from here. And like I said yesterday, we're going to find that often in this book because each paragraph is just exploding with critical information. This paragraph, I'll remind you, says that a wise person pays attention to detail. In our generation, I don't think that's ever been more relevant. It's very difficult to pay attention to detail when there is so much noise, when distractions are everywhere. Everywhere you turn, there's a billboard. Everywhere you click, there's another sign. There's another notice. There's another picture that entices you. There's all kinds of different things to distract you from the things that are meaningful and important. That's why it becomes difficult to pay attention to detail because, first of all, the volume of things that you can be distracted by is record-breaking today more than any other generation. And the volume behind them, in other words, how much they've perfected getting your attention, distracting you from what's important, has reached new highs. And so it's very difficult for the average person to maintain focus in their lives, to focus on their spouse and their needs, to focus on the children and their needs, to focus on community. It's very difficult because we're being pulled at by forces that have invested untold fortunes. I want to say trillions of dollars. I just don't know the number. Just think of the Super Bowl. Just think of one event and what it takes to buy a 30-second spot on the Super Bowl, okay? It's ridiculous. So tell me trillions of dollars haven't been spent in marketing and advertising and perfecting the ability to get to you, to drag your attention away from all the things that you need to be focusing on. They've perfected it. It's become a science. So it's a challenge. But that's the key. The key is, and the whole idea around Shabbat that we talked about yesterday, is that you are forced to get out of that rat race. You are forced to extract yourself from a den of lions and to lock yourself in your community, lock yourself in your home, with your family, with the most important people in your life, and take away the power of society, because that's what's distracting you 6 days a week, and they'll be glad to do it on the 7th day if you let them. We won't let them. That's the difference. We force ourselves. The Torah first forces us. God forces us in his love for us. He says, you need to observe the Sabbath. It is a critical mitzvah. There are 3 critical mitzvahs that we find that are signs, that are covenants between us and Hashem. One of them is Shabbat. And in fact, the acronym for the other 2, the whole thing is Shabbat. Shin Beit Taf, which is Shabbat. Brit, which is circumcision. And tefillin, which is the phylacteries that we wrap around our hands and our head when we pray. Those 3 for men are signs. They are commitments, agreements, deals, pacts, however you want to say it, between us and the Creator that are eternal. They are identifying markers. And so if you want to be considered a Jew, you got to keep Shabbat. Bottom line. If you don't like that, can't help you. Take it up with the boss. But from a kosher, halachic perspective, if you want to enjoy the benefits that come with Jewish law, then you have to be a Shomer Shabbat Jew. And that, my friends, is a positive. It is a win, as we just said, to be able to keep Shabbat, to extract yourself by force from a secular, self-serving society, to be able to focus on the good, important things in your life. You want to be forced? You need to be forced to do that? It just makes absolutely no sense. You should run to do that. And that's usually what happens, by the way. People who aren't used to keeping Shabbat think that it is a form of torture, that somehow by disconnecting from the mundane and the self-serving society that is secularism is somehow painful. Until they try it, until they actually commit to doing it, planning properly, because you have to plan to keep Shabbat properly, otherwise you get bored, right? And if you're bored doing it for the first time or the second time, it's easy to get distracted and led back to what you know. So if you've planned for it, and then you start to keep Shabbat, you realize almost out of the gate, almost immediately, especially if you've planned, right away, you start to recognize how beautiful it is. Just like going on an all-inclusive vacation. Who doesn't like going to an island with their friends and being waited on hand and foot and not having to focus on the craziness and being distracted and being banged on for your attention all day long? Who doesn't enjoy that? You can have it every week. That's called Shabbat. Distract from the crazy mundane and focus on the beautiful things that God has given you, right? Once they've done it, they've tested it out, suddenly they realize what they've been missing. Suddenly they realize that these mitzvahs, hey, wait a second, they're not for God. God doesn't benefit when I spend more time with my family. God doesn't benefit when I grow emotionally, when I grow in my wisdom. God doesn't benefit from me having a community and like-minded people surrounding me, and rabbis and leaders and people of similar backgrounds with children who are similar in age to my children, who can play together and grow together, meaningful Torah learning, beautiful, amazing songs, amazing food, sense of belonging. He doesn't benefit from that. You know who benefits from that? We do. So once you start keeping, then you start to recognize what you've been missing out on. The key, my friends, is to start it sooner than later, because the clock is ticking. And if you're not doing it, you're missing out. You are missing out, and you're going to eventually figure it out. But is it going to be too late? Are you going to kick yourself and think to yourself, what a fool I was? I could have done this when my kids were young. I could have done this when I just got married, taking time for myself and my spouse. Maybe that would have saved our marriage. Do you know how many marriages fall apart because of this? Or because of what I'm about to tell you? That a little hint from the Creator is sufficient to stimulate his thinking and prod him into action, yet a fool doesn't wake up until he is coerced. Furthermore, the fool doesn't admit fault and frequently continues in his spiritual slumber even after he begins to suffer. What's the connection back to marriage and divorce? Everything. Absolutely everything. We don't see ourselves as the problem. We see everybody else around us as the problem. The fool doesn't admit fault. Do you understand? That's a big challenge. Do you know how freeing it is to just admit fault? A lot of people fear admitting fault because they fear, number one, feeling inadequate. But number two, they may have been brought up in an environment where once they've admitted fault, they're berated, nonstop berated and reminded of their failures. Most people don't do that. You should know. Most people aren't there to beat you over the head. A lot of people want to find fault because they want to find closure. They want to figure out, just like we said with the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. It's very important to determine fault so that you could figure out how to correct so that it doesn't happen again. And the same thing can be with relationships. Okay, we've established what caused this blowout. Let's fix it so that the blowout doesn't happen again. Very simple. Once you've done that, even if it means admitting fault, you move on. You don't dwell on it. You don't sit around and berate it and keep beating it to death. Nobody wants to do that. And if you're with somebody who wants to do that, it's a toxic relationship. That's a different problem. But good, healthy relationships, you've established what the problem is and you move on. A lot of people are terrified to think that they could be the problem. So they're so busy blaming their boss, blaming their coworker, blaming their spouse, blaming their children, blaming their parents, blaming everybody except for them. That, my friends, is a challenge, because ultimately what happens is you're not working on yourself. If you're not willing to accept any of the blame, then that means that you're perfect. And you're never going to work on yourself. You're never going to be able to identify your problems and put mechanisms in place to become a better individual. You're always blaming other people. Therefore, they are always the ones who need to change. And what happens? People end up in, God forbid, divorce, which is rampant today more than ever before in every generation. It just keeps getting worse and worse. And what happens in the next relationship? Oftentimes, it falls apart. Or they have such a hard time getting into another relationship. Why? Because they've carried their baggage with them. They were part of the problem and they never fixed their problem. The person that you married, by the way, is not the same person today as they were when you married them. If you married for 10 years, it's a different person. If you're married for 30 years, it's a very different person than the one that you married, because you're growing, they're growing, you're supposed to grow, and you're supposed to grow together. That's the whole idea. Some people don't grow and blame the spouse for their growth and are uncomfortable with it. So instead of growing and learning and becoming a better, stronger person, they blame the other person for their own growth, and they try and find somebody new who fits their old existing character. It's wrong. You have to own your own faults and move forward. That's why he mentions that person is a fool who doesn't wake up unless he's coerced and doesn't admit fault, and frequently continues in his spiritual slumber even after he begins to suffer. Even after the tribulations, even after the divorce, the first divorce, the second, the third, the fourth, people today are getting divorced like they're trading up acquaintances. Even after the tribulations, these individuals don't wake up from their slumber. It's time to give yourself a shake. How do you wake up? Get present. Get into the know. And if you don't know how to do that, he's given us a secret key to unlock that power, and it's called Shabbat. We just finished one, but the good news is there's another one coming. So get ready for it. Prepare for Shabbat. Put mechanisms in place to have a community, to have meals, to have activities. And once you've done that and Shabbat comes around, you will start to recognize what it means to be present, and you will start to wake up from your slumber. Have an amazing day, my friends. We'll chat again tomorrow. Thank you for spending time with us on the Trust Factor podcast. If you've heard something today that moved you, save this episode and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss upcoming conversations that challenge, empower, and uplift. And if you're on social media, connect with us. Leave your thoughts. Drop a quote that resonated with you. Hashtag the Trust Factor podcast. Until next time, keep growing in your trust and keep living with purpose. I'm Jesse Revivo, and this has been the Trust Factor podcast. Thanks for listening.